to the world. Subscribe now to the Hot 97 YouTube channel. It's Ebro in the Morning with Laura Stiles and Rosenberg.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ebro, Laura, and Rosenberg. We are here with our guest today, Tiffany Cabàn, who we met when she was running. You were running for district attorney, correct?
2 years ago now, district attorney.
Yeah, that's when we met.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, and you were almost won it. It was so close. But now as you stay true to your word and true to whom you are running for City Council District 22.
That's right.
And you are a person who has dedicated their life to helping change New York City and continuing to push progressive ideas. I would love to hear where you feel like the city's at today, post-pandemic and COVID, what you've seen in Queens, courtesy of the district attorney there, Melinda Katz, and where you see yourself being useful in City Council District 22.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate y'all having me again. It's nice to be sharing space, but I'm going to start with that last question because I think what it boils down to is simply you get in where you fit in, you go where the work is, and there's no lack of work that needs to get done to help our folks. We see even before the pandemic, right? Like there are just serious inequities around our city. Our city works for some people and not for others. It's no surprise that it is not working for our working class, our Black and brown, our low income communities. And we've got to do better. And in terms of where we are with the pandemic, just to be very clear, we're at a crossroads. It feels like a precipice moment. There are multiple co-occurring crises that every single one of us is experiencing. There's a global pandemic that we are not yet through, right? We are dealing with a police violence pandemic, and that's real. And also a climate crisis. But what I tell folks also at the same time is the literal definition of a crisis is a turning point. It's an opportunity to mobilize, to radicalize, to organize, and to build out systems, that work for us. So I think that we have a lot of possibility here, and it's building on the work that we were trying to do when I ran for DA. We fell out of over 90,000 votes, 55 short. But it's 0.06 of 1%, y'all. So also,
you've done some math on this.
This is my PSA. Like, your vote counts. Do not think that your vote doesn't count. Get up in that booth and make your voice heard, because every single vote matters.
But with work from progressives like yourself, and you guys continuing to create dialogue and bring these issues to the forefront, it feels like other politicians who are holding office are taking notice and wanting to implement these things because they know their jobs require it now. Are you seeing some of that, or is it all just lip service to nothing getting done?
No, I think I'm absolutely seeing all of that. When we look, especially at the hyper local level, when you look at the city level, we are putting the pressure on. We are seeing things happen that we have never seen before, whether it is the call to divest from the bloated police budget to some of the wins we've had at, the state level with halting solitary confinement, repealing the walking while trans ban. We are letting it be known that we are rejecting this culture of criminalization and prosecution and incarceration, and demanding that the government provide what is needed for every single person to live with dignity. I have a friend and an organizer out in Astoria houses, and he told me, he said, Tiffany, it takes a village. They say it takes a village to raise a child. But who is uplifting and supporting the village? And, my response to that is the job of government. And that is what has been lacking and has not been done. We throw over $10 billion towards policing and incarceration instead of throwing all of that money into building out safe and healthy communities, whether it is, affordable housing, healthcare, education, youth programs, violence interruption programs, elder care programs, because we've been defunding all of that stuff for a long time. And people are finally, saying, well, this is a path to making change with our elected officials. Whereas in the past, we might have been disillusioned, say, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change things. But if I could add one more example to that, people, this is a big dialogue around divesting from policing, defunding the police, investing in community. What does that mean? One really easy, quick example is that I was born in Queens. I was born in St. John's Hospital. It doesn't exist anymore. It's one of 20 hospitals that have closed in Queens over the past 20 years. We have been defunding our hospitals. And now you fast forward to today in the middle of a global pandemic, and we had Elmhurst Hospital with refrigerated trucks outside, not enough hospital beds. The city instituted a hiring freeze. We couldn't even hire more nurses and doctors. And that is a function of our city's decisions about where our money goes and where it doesn't go.
And I think we saw this across the nation too, didn't we? I mean, one of the big reveals, I know Black folks, we already knew that the health services for our communities and our own health was in jeopardy based on lifestyle and, just the white supremacist infrastructure that there is.
Yep.
But the other thing that was made very real for everywhere was the lack of healthcare and the lack of health systems that we were not prepared at all.
Yeah. And Black and brown people were more likely to have pre-existing conditions or comorbidities, right?
That's right.
Like I'll give you an example in my own family. Where I live in Astoria is actually called the Asthma Alley. And my mom grew up in the Woodside houses, and she's, right next door, and she's a chronic asthmatic. And so you look again at what some of the outcomes are.
Environmental racism.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And then you add into the fact that when my mom got vaccinated, I didn't know I was holding so much tension and stress and anxiety in my body. I cried because making the connection that the fact that she was a chronic asthmatic meant she was at higher risk. The fact that she was a Latina woman meant that she waited a lot longer than her white counterparts to get vaccinated, right? And those things are no mistake. And connected also to our prison industrial complex, the same communities that are over-policed, over-criminalized, resource-starved, those same Black and brown communities, they're the ones with the worst health outcomes. They're the ones with the polluting power plants in their backyard. And I talk a lot about that and climate reparations in my Green New Deal plan for the city. It's all connected. I represented people on Rikers Island who then went home to neighborhoods with lead, paint in their walls and crumbling infrastructure and illegal, dumping in their backyards. And that all, to your point, ties back to white supremacy and racism.
Because there needs to be a climate victims compensation fund, right? Because of all of the things that governments have done, local and state and federal, have done to communities that have caused, in some cases, irreparable damage to generations, right? And so there needs to be a conversation around fixing that up. They're, obviously hesitant because once they start opening the checkbook, then, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits because there's been a lot of victims of this government, and things like you said, like lead paint, lead pipes, and the list goes on. A lot of your platform, once again, Tiffany's running for City Council District 22, pushing for the Green New Deal for New York City. What does it, when we hear these words, Green New Deal on a national level, it seems to make sense. What does that exactly mean for a city like New York? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, on the city level, you can see it when you walk outside your apartment or wherever you live, right? Like, yes, a Green New Deal for the city means opposing our polluting power plants that we've got. And in my district, we generate over 50% of the power that gets used around the city. It's why we have the worst asthma rates here. It's all like fracked natural gas. But going into renewable energy, wind, solar, battery. And in my district is also Rikers Island. So, part of that plan is closing Rikers Island and turning it into a renewable energy island, store enough battery energy to get rid of all of our dirty, polluting peaker plants across the city. It means making public transportation better, right? So that we're encouraging the use of public transportation. Here, we've got almost all of our train stations are above ground. Only one of them has a working elevator, and that's a disaster for our disability and elderly community. It means little things like throwing bike racks onto our buses and switching over to an electric fleet. It means more green spaces. It means taking care of our food deserts and having things like community gardens and more park space. it means affordable housing with, green retrofits and infrastructure so that we aren't adding to the pollutants that we're putting out into our environment. And it also means fully funding sanitation and composting, because we have been cutting the funding to that stuff for the past, few years now.
One of the topics you ran on when you were running for district attorney was the stopping the criminalization of sex workers, I believe.
Yes.
And making sure that they were treated as victims, not as criminals, and continuing to be locked up. Correct? Am I articulating it right?
Yeah. So, I mean, this idea of saying, again, getting to the root causes of crime and asking, why do people engage in sex work? And more often than not, and I don't want to conflate sex work with sex trafficking, right? Two different things. But we have here, even in Western Queens, a large population of trans Latinx sex workers. And it's survival work. It is how they're able to put food on their table and take care of themselves and their families because of institutional discrimination, because of barriers to access to employment, to proper health care, to housing. And this goes back right to our city government and our infrastructure about, like, how are we building up those things? Are we creating city laws and legislation to prevent discrimination against folks? Are we creating spaces for more comprehensive healthcare, like clinics that are able to serve our, queer and trans and gender nonconforming neighbors? Are we, all of these different things? This is about making sure every single individual has access to the things that they need to survive and live with dignity and have opportunities to thrive. That's public health infrastructure, which is like rooted directly into what's within the city's purview. When we say we can't criminalize these things, well, then the other part of that equation is, well, then we got to build out systems of support so that our systems of criminalization aren't the things that are catching that.
That's right. And more recently, haven't we seen de Blasio and this current administration move in the direction of not allowing police to show up to every mental health issue that's called on 911? Hasn't some of that momentum started already?
Yeah, and we have to double, triple down, right? Like when I said there are multiple crises, we have to treat it that way and come at it with a ton of urgency. So we have alternate response systems. We use like is that the official term, alternate response systems? Yeah, I mean, there are alternatives to policing. The city's program is called the Crisis Management System, and so it includes alternative responders. It also includes some of our violence interruption stuff. So the partnerships with the Cure Violence groups and stuff like that. We see you in the street when we're out with the Peace Mobile. We always see you out there. Yeah. Well, shout out to Erica Ford and Life Camp and all the great work that they're doing. And then we've got 696 out here with Cure Violence. This is about just saying, if it saves lives, it's worth doing. And we know that expanding these alternative systems, right? When we go to Cure Violence, when we go to Life Camp, we reduce gun violence in our neighborhoods anywhere from minimum 30% to upwards of 70% in ways that the police aren't capable of doing. So let's double down. We've seen an increase in shootings. We see it every time when there's economic crisis and people are really, really hurting and desperate. And so I know that we're going to be getting expanded Cure Violence out in Astoria houses and Woodside houses. That's a long time coming, and we should have it across the city. We should fully fund it. And the same for mental health response. Over the past, a number of years, over 5,000 people have been killed by police, and over half of them were people living with either, some sort of mental health illness or disability. And these are not the folks to respond. Police are not equipped to do that. We've got to save lives. We have to make sure we're meeting people with care.
So what would you do? What do you do in situations like that where you're dealing with someone, whether they have mental health issues or not, who are in like a violent or dangerous sort of situation? So
the one thing that I want to start by pointing out is that the scenario that you're pointing out is like the 1% of calls. It's actually very, very rare. So, for 99% of calls, you are going to be better off sending a mental health expert coupled with an EMT or, an emergency medicine worker. And they've been doing that in other places with a lot of success. They have removed police from most of the mental health calls out in LA. There's a really great program in Denver called the STAR program. We're starting to do a little bit here in New York City, but again, it needs to be scaled. They have answered in a matter of just a few short months over 800 calls of people who are in mental health crises, but also people that are accused of things like trespass and other low-level offenses. And they have sent out, not police, but these mental health experts coupled with EMTs and service providers. Not a single one has ended in violence, has ended in the need for an arrest or prosecution or jail time. And people were just connected with care and services. Because we know that once police get involved and, the prosecution, the courts get involved, I'm a former public defender. It's a downward spiral, right? You keep,
of course,
you keep coming back. And, when we talk about these alternatives, we're not saying we're getting rid of the police tomorrow. We literally have to build out the alternatives alongside it so that we're not dropping things and letting them fall through gaps.
Well, I just ask about the really violent situations, knowing that they're the smallest percentage, but those situations are what keep people connected to police because they fear that in the worst circumstance, they want to call someone who's prepared for that. Even though I agree with you that 99 times out of 100, that's not what you need.
Yeah.
But, someone's store is getting broken into by armed robbers. It's a different situation maybe than a mental health professional.
And what I would say to that is, like, right now, unfortunately, the best we got is the police. And so right now in that 1%, we're sending the police. But we also have to reckon with the fact that we spend almost $0 in preventing that from happening in the first place, right? The best ways to prevent crime, including violent crime, are resourcing our community. So I talked a little bit about what lowers gun violence, for example, but let's take things like armed robbery or assaults or things like that. The research shows that if you simply fund 10 community-based organizations in your neighborhood, crime goes down across the board, whether it is murder, sexual assault, armed robbery, burglary, all of it goes down. And so we have to also zoom out and say, where does accountability start and end? Like, we want to hold individuals accountable for the harm that they do when they mess up. But at the same time saying, well, how did we get here? And if there are ways to prevent it, then it is our responsibility to put in that work.
Tiffany Cabàn, City Council District 22 over in Queens. How many seats are available in this go round?
Oh my gosh. Y'all, we have such an opportunity. No matter where you live, check out who is running for city council because it's a 51-person body that controls, along with the mayor, an over $90 billion budget, right? They decide where the money goes and where it doesn't. And over 30 of those seats are open because of term limits and things like that. Like, there is an opportunity for real transformation here. So if you live in District 22, which is Astoria, parts of East Elmhurst, Woodside, Jackson Heights, and then it includes Rikers Island, or you live in some other council district, do your homework and make sure you get out and vote.
There it is. Tiffany Cabàn, it's great to see you again. Keep going.
Always.
We got your back over here.
Appreciate y'all.
Good luck, Tiffany.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Good luck.